Hello friends, this is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto rose as Flash with Hiraishin and won Temari's heart? Episode 2. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, Naruto's mastery of Hiraishin is reaching incredible heights, and every battle brings him one step closer to becoming the Shinobi world's next legendary Yellow Flash. Now, let's start. Silence fell in the council hall until, with a timbre in his tone that very few had heard in a long time, the Hokage began proceedings with a somber command. Bring them in. As always, the Anbu complied soundlessly and the doors to the main meeting area swung open, ushering in a small group of figures to muted apprehension and, in one case, almost tangible loathing from a few of the assembled. Before any words could be spoken and anything fell too far out of hand, however, the Sandaime was quick to hurry along the proceedings, as curious for answers as most of the council of clan heads and elite jonin ninja present were. I will be brief as I assume you know why you are all here. The quartet of figures, 2 guards and 2 ninja who were currently under investigation, swapped an almost imperceptible glance before the smaller figure folded its arms and gave a gruff, humorless laugh, a mocking smile directed at one of the assembled council who, despite his outer calm, silently seethed at the humiliation the gesture represented. Judging by the company you're keeping at the minute, Gigi, supremely unconcerned with the rising killing intent his casual slander provoked, Uzumaki Naruto broke off his silent challenge for a moment before raising his arms to fold them back behind his head in another careless gesture. I can hazard a guess. Be silent, Uzumaki. There was iron in the old man's voice, enough to make even the number 1 surprising ninja in Konoha wary of poking the temper of the god of shinobi too much further. Myself, my advisors and the assembled council here have questions regarding your conduct in the Chunin exams and have brought both yourself and your sensei before us to have them answered. Do you have any questions or objections to this? That was a loaded question if ever the Jinchuriki had heard one. Technically he could say no, but in doing so he would earn himself at best the distrust of the majority of Konoha's ranking ninja and at worst a one-way ticket to the business end of the T&I department. Doing the sensible thing for arguably the second time in his life, therefore Naruto merely nodded, though not before letting his parting shot out in the open. My conduct, Far as I see it, I did exactly what I'd said I'd do and beat up a load of bad guys who got in the way afterwards while doing it. In fact, if I remember things right, I could say that several people in this chamber, including perhaps even you Hokage-sama, owe me either your lives or the lives of members of your families and clans. Was that the wrong thing to do? Several of the council swapped uneasy glances at this before, with genteel diplomacy, the venerable Third Hokage steered the conversation back in the direction he needed it to go. Perhaps not, Naruto-kun. His words didn't exactly project the aura of menace that a Hokage was meant to exude, but the old man couldn't deny that, in his way, the Uzumaki was exactly right in what he said. However, to be quite blunt, rather explosive techniques you displayed in the arena and throughout the subsequent invasion are completely unknown to all present in this room save you and possibly 1 or 2 others. My hands are tied. As Hokage, I cannot allow techniques or a bloodline or whatever it is that allowed you to decimate both your and our opponents in the Chunin exams to roam around Konoha unchecked. The risk of either loss or, I mean no offense in this Naruto, abuse is too great. Therefore, I must ask once more, can you or your sensei explain what you exactly did in the finals of those exams? It was at this point a second voice broke in, Homaru speaking up after clearing his throat and pushing his glasses up his nose. With all due respect, Hokage-sama, I motion that we ask the boy's sensei first. Nothing against yourself, Naruto-san. The seated figure inclined his head at least semi-respectfully towards the suddenly glowering Jinchuriki before rationalizing his point. But Kakashi-san has more experience in the ninja arts and may be able to explain his teaching or your techniques with greater accuracy and clarity than you can. meaning none of us have to spend any longer than necessary in this room and letting us all get back to our normal lives sooner rather than later. This point was met with a smattering of chuckles, including, the advisor was pleased to notice, from Naruto himself, just as well. The last thing anyone can afford to do at the moment is make an enemy out of him. Least of all as Konoha is still in recovery from whatever foolishness possessed Suna to follow Oto's lead and try to destroy us. Picking up where his old friend had left off, Sarutobi nodded and, hearing no opposition, presented the point officially to the ninja in the dock. Very well, Homaru-san. You make a good point, Kakashi-san. The Junin snapped to attention as much as his natural slouch would allow him to. As Junin-sensei to the genin in question, I ask you, what exactly did Uzumaki Naruto learn in preparation for the finals of Konoha's Chunin exams? An excellent question, Hokage-sama. One that, as I was otherwise unavoidably detained throughout that period, I've been wondering about myself. The copy nin answered at length, raising a few eyebrows around the room before several people broke out in very cold sweats as the A-ranked Junin turned to look across his student's shoulder towards one of the guard detail. His next words, an ice smile dropping the temperature in the room by at least 10 degrees as it sank into all present exactly who had been babysitting the resident Jinchuriki unsupervised for what most sane people would consider to be far too long. What exactly did my student learn during the past month? Seeing the faces of frozen fear facing him all of a sudden, Naruto simply couldn't resist the urge to chuckle in as sinister a fashion as he could manage, hearing a very familiar noise in his left ear and moving a hand towards it in response, a cold roughness on his finger as a hand fell on his shoulder and the voice of the ninja who he'd sought help from over the 30 days grace period spoke up to answer his detractors for him. He learned all I had to teach him, and more than that. The hand was joined by a few extra adornments, warm, soft weight pressing into his shoulders and back as he fought down the urge to sigh. And she calls me a bad influence on the village as a whole. Hello Kettle, this is Pot speaking, he taught even me a few new tricks. With that teasing drawl and twin expressions of malevolent glee on the faces that were now very close together and staring the council down together, Sarutobi and Kakashi together both fought down the urge to sigh and place a mental wager on how many council members were going to throw a fit by the time this story was fully told. The first inkling he had that something was very, very wrong was when Maida Guy spoke to him without a single reference of youth, hipness or challenges. Kakashi-san, the bowl-cut Junin's face was as pale as marble and as Kakashi's single eye darted over his shoulder and saw the two students from his team who hadn't progressed to the finals, one of whom the copy nin noticed was still heavily bandaged and crushing a crutch in his pythonesque grip, sat together and seemingly holding onto each other unconsciously in what appeared to be a form of shell shock. The monovisioned Junin realized what this change of attitude was likely to be regarding. Much as I respect you for being my eternal rival and a great ninja in your own unyouthful manner, I find myself unable to avoid asking, what the bloody hell have you been teaching your students? That question almost made Kakashi drop his usual literature. In all the time he'd ever known Guy, he could have counted the number of times his fellow Junin had sworn on one hand with fingers to spare. All thoughts of his usual response were gone from his head, especially as he belatedly realized the other joining in the box were taking a sudden interest in what he had to say. I take it Naruto-kun won then. Guy's eyebrows, always animated at the best of times, seemed to jolt as though they'd had a difference of opinion with a Chidori, but before even the bombastic Junin could speak, a second voice entered the conversation, a light chuckle that made all present loom over and disregard the proctor's voice below, indicating the last match of the first round of the Chunin exam finals was about to kick off. Of course he won, Cyclops. Looking over his shoulder and with cold sweat freeing to ice on his back, the one-eyed Junin fought to keep his teeth from chattering as he beheld the glowering smile of the shortest member of his team stood just beside and in front of the person he must have recruited as a sensei in the months since progressing to the finals. But why her? Why? Dear Kami-sama, why did he have to go hunting down her of all people? As though reading his unspoken question directly from his mind, Mitarashi Anko merely smiled. Running her tongue along her teeth as one of her pets slowly snaked its way out from her sleeve and draped itself across Uzumaki Naruto's shoulders, the Jinchuriki not reacting save to slowly pull up one of the new gloves he wore as the serpent hissed lowly in his ear and his new sensei finished her earlier question. When I train someone for Chunin, I make sure they're ready to eat hell fire and spit the ashes into someone's eye before I consider them ready. And as that white-eyed prick just found out, she glanced down into the arena, remembering the screams from not so long ago with fierce pride as the prodigal diamond in the rough who'd introduced himself to her merely a month ago simply laid waste to the so-called future of the Hyuga clan. Not even hell fire burns hotter than revenge. With this scene burned eternally into his mind without even the need for Obito's last gift, Kakashi found himself recalling that day only a few scant weeks ago and promptly began kicking himself for failing to heed his own advice and not look underneath to see exactly who Uzumaki Naruto had been describing in the last conversation he'd had with his sensei before the month's grace period beginning. Kakashi sighed as he lounged against the wall, flicking idly through the pages of his book without really taking anything in as he sought a way to puzzle through the next conundrum he could already hear heading his way. One with no easy way out, of course. Nothing in my life can ever be simple. If I could tell them both the whole facts, it would be a piece of cake to get Naruto to see where I'm coming from. That much was a given as, no matter how much the Uzumaki had his eyes set on the Chunin vest dangled in front of him some 30 days from now, Naruto would give it up like a shot if he thought one of his squad was in danger and he had a chance to protect them at all. But, as things stand, I'm going to have to play favorites once again to make sure Orochimaru's fangs stay out of my student's neck. It was unpalatable, especially to a shinobi who did at least attempt to treat each member of his team fairly despite the council leaning on him to prepare the last Uchiha for the great things expected of a genius of his caliber, but it simply had to be done. Though he himself had sealed the black blot the hubby Sennin had left on Sasuke's neck, Kakashi would be the first to admit he wasn't his sensei, and his fuinjutsu, though far above average, probably wasn't going to be enough to keep the cancer contained unless it had help from Sasuke himself. The only way he was going to be able to do that would be to keep the boy isolated from the others and show him some of Konoha's strength to dissuade him from accepting Orochimaru's offer of power at any price while at the same time being able to protect the last Uchiha from any kidnapping attempts that might result from the month's grace period the Sandaime had given the finalists of the Chunin exams. Flipping another page and chuckling at the scene before him, the copy nin mused his options before giving the mental equivalent of a sigh. Sad though it is, and much as I don't like it, I have to let Naruto and Sakura go for this month. Sakura shouldn't be too much of a problem as she's out of the running and the Genjutsu scrolls one left her should be enough to prod her down that road, but all I can hope for Naruto is that he accepts the reasons I give him right about. Hey, Kakashi-sensei. Now. Ma. This is a hospital, Naruto-kun. No need to shout. The lazy Junin replied before looking over his book at his shortest, loudest student. The Uzumaki for his part seemed to take the copy nin's advice, lowering his voice before asking his next question. Sorry, which room is Sasuke-tem in? I'm afraid he's not allowed visitors, Naruto. The ceiling took a lot out of him. Not to mention me. Facing up to Orochimaru at the same time as perform a level 4 seal is not something undertaken lightly. However, I can guess what you're here for and, unfortunately, I cannot train you for the next month. As he'd expected, Naruto's eyes dropped at this and Kakashi had to bite down a wince as they did. Out of all the students in the team he'd never wanted, the copy nin would have had to admit that it had been the so-called dead last who'd made the biggest impression on him and who, truth be told, was improving the fastest out the three of his pupils. However, Naruto still had his flaws, and one of them was that he never coped with rejection very well, though perhaps understandable due to his past, Right now it was a nuisance as far as Kakashi was concerned, even if he tried to limit the damage as much as he was able to after hearing his student's next words. It's Sasuke, isn't it? Yes, Sasuke is facing an opponent who has shown no compunction about killing an already crippled fellow Leaf Ninja. The older Junin pointed out, hoping to soften the blow. I doubt that I can teach him enough to allow him to win his match even in a month, but hopefully I can keep him alive through it. On the other hand, you are facing another Leaf Ninja, admittedly rather an obnoxious one, though despite his somewhat questionable character he will not kill you for the sake of mere promotion. I see, the Jinchuriki replied softly and, hoping he might have a toe in the door, Kakashi pressed on, snapping his book shut and into a convenient pouch as he spoke on. However, I have found you a substitute teacher for the next 30 days, one who's more effective than me and will help you sort out the basics you need to improve on before your match with Neji. It was at this point that Kakashi fell silent, somewhat perturbed, though he'd never admit it, by the sudden quiet but nevertheless malevolent laughter that emerged from Naruto's lowered face. However, before he could question the reason behind his student's sudden descent into mirth, the Jinchuriki suddenly looked up, meeting him full in the face with an expression that Kakashi both couldn't place and didn't like the look of. You flatter me, Kakashi-sensei. No one's ever looked out for me like you do. Much like his twisted grin, the tone Naruto addressed him in was somewhere between mockery and a sincere tone of thanks. However, this time I don't really need your help. I've got a teacher of my own in mind and the nurse just told me where I can find them. You'd better train Sasuke well though, the orange-clad form told him with a raised finger, seemingly amused as he began to depart. I'd hate for him to get knocked out of the exams before I have a chance. I'll keep it mind Naruto, Kakashi pointed out, fighting for time as he tried to see exactly where the Jinchuriki was going and, more importantly, answer the question that was now foremost in his mind. Just out of interest though, who is your new sensei? The question seemed to give Naruto pause, stopping him as he strode down the hospital hallway and making him look over his shoulder, apparently thinking hard for an answer before, with a burst of inspiration behind his suddenly sparkling blue eyes. One of the best, he said whimsically before turning away with a final wave. Now all I have to do is find out what room she's in and talk her into taking me on for a few weeks. Should either be easy or I'll get some resistance training out of trying to convince her. Either way I win. See you around, Kakashi-sensei. Hope Sasuke wakes up soon. With that and a final wave, Naruto rounded a final corner and was lost from sight. Okay, not quite what I was expecting. Dropping the hand he'd used to wave weakly back to the Jinchuriki, the copy nin tried to decipher the message his most surprising student had just delivered to him. Still, I suppose I should be grateful he's taking responsibility for his own training at least. I wonder who he had his mind on as a sensei though. As far as I knew, the only kunoichi sensei he knows about is Kurenai-san, and I didn't think they'd had any contact whatsoever outside of inter-team sparring and meetings. Oh well. Deciding to leave tomorrow's problems for tomorrow, Kakashi turned his attention back to his Ika with final mental wish for Naruto to do well and fulfill his vow to bring Neji down in the finals of the Chunin exams. Whatever he's got planned, I'm sure the future Hokage can handle it, and if he can't, the med nins should be able to stitch him back together in time to get him to the arena on time in a month or so. Sitting in the waiting room of the hospital and tapping her foot as she waited impatiently for one of the medical ninja bumming around to get off there and discharge her Mitarashi Anko was not a happy kunoichi, as evidenced by the large circle of empty seats all around her that had been cleared by her subconscious killing intent. Her mood, generally bad at the best of times and not helped by being ordered to the hospital by the sandame like a school child with a grazed knee in the aftermath of the preliminary round in case she had underlying injuries following her brief reunion with her one-time beloved sensei, was gradually souring even further as she fought back the urge to simply say to hell with it all and go and hunt down some dango and sake for a slap-up binge in her apartment. Hey, fine advert for Konoha Shinobi I am right now. The snake mistress's naturally snide sense of humor rose to the forefront of her mind as she recalled what had happened in the past few hours and how quickly everyone seemed to be passing through his particular waiting area due to her smoldering presence, like a volcano ready to blow at any minute and lay waste to all around it. Even I pity the poor sap who gets conned into. Mitarashi Anko, I'm assuming that's you. The serpent-wielding kunoichi took a moment to slowly replace the kunai that had flipped into her hand as though it had a life of its own at the sound of the unfamiliar voice as she casually reminded herself that attempted murder in a hospital was probably not going to endear her to either the Hokage or the medical staff present. Even though fixing up dumb idiots with more bravado than sense is what we pay their wages for. Okay then, lunatic. With a sigh she looked over her shoulder to see who'd disturbed her introspection with a fatalistic expression set on her face. Let's get this party started. Maybe. Depends who's. Hey, I remember you. Likewise, the orange ninja whose cheek she'd nicked about a week ago nodded at her raised eyebrows as he looked her up and down, apparently considering something before carrying on. I quote from the medical staff, crazy snake bitch who thought swinging in the trees with a Orochimaru was a good idea. Sounds like something you'd do. Anko snarled. Memory uncomfortably pranged by the reminder and her earlier thoughts about ninja with more bravado than sense, before returning to the matter at hand and spitting her answer venomously. Yeah, what about it? Nothing. Your life, your choice what you do with it. So why are you looking for me? Because you're incredibly attractive and I fancy a game of doctors and nurses. The response was so off the cuff and deadpan that even she had to stifle a sudden snort of laughter, flipping around fully in her chair to regard the genin with a truly evil glare before he raised a hand to forestall any violence on his part and gave the real reason behind his visit. No, seriously, you've got just the kind of crazy I need at the minute. Is that so? Just as well. After checking his face and body language to make sure the blonde gaki whose name eluded her wasn't trying to pull one of the pranks he'd become so famous for while he'd been the terror of the academy. And, more importantly, a pain in the to the Iruka-kun who will one day be mine. All mine. Oh. Yeah. Genteelly reminding herself that glazed eyes and drooling over a super hot ghost in her mind was bad manners, the kunoichi regathered her poise and stood up, trench coat draping to the floor with a rustling noise as she reared back to her full and imposing height. I don't play doctors and nurses as much as embalmer and corpse. Anyway, what are you going on about with your kind of crazy? What are you, crazy? Considering I'm asking you to be my sensei for the next month and oversee my training for the finals of the Chunin exams, I'd hazard a guess that yeah, quite a few people would call for me to handle with care by the men in white coats. Anko blinked, stared, blinked again and, when it finally became apparent just how serious the kid appeared to be, she doubled over in helpless laughter. You want me? She managed to push herself to her full height only to catch a glimpse of his earnest expression and promptly dissolve into laughter again. Oh, that's good. That's priceless. How much did Kakashi Baka pay you to try pulling that one on me? In fact, tell you what, however much it was, I'll double it if you can bring me his Ika. Gasping down a deep breath and shaking her head to try and dislodge her mirthful tears, mood 100% better than a few moments ago until she flicked a second glance his way and felt her mirth punctured like a balloon that had come a little too close to one of Hasawada Tenten's training sessions. You're serious about this, aren't you? Serious as snakebite, he confirmed with a challenging smirk. Though before Anko could say anything to this he'd stepped forwards and lowered his voice. Look, I don't need you to teach me exactly. All I need is, kinda like, someone to watch what I'm doing and advise me how to use what I've got better. I've got something I need to do in a month and I can't afford to fail. Just the set of his jaw and the gleam of almost fanaticism in his eyes was enough to show Anko exactly what was on his mind. She'd been at the arena that day spectating as well and had heard the Jinchuriki's declaration as Naruto had stood tall and faced down a taijutsu prodigy with the blood of the girl the elder Hyuga had attempted to kill dripping off his fingertips. Wow, Yaki's got it bad. So then what are my options here? Take the offer and chain myself to having to wet nurse a little brat for a month with all the thrills, spills and accidental maiming that accompanies it, or turn him down, go for several nights out and then kick my heels until the finals a few weeks from now. It was a pretty stark choice, to be honest, one Anko had to put quite a lot of thought into. She would have been the first to admit she wasn't exactly ideal sensei material, and not just because of the lingering shadow her own teacher had cast over the rest of her life. As far as she was concerned, the only time the words, Mitarashi Anko, and maternity, should be included in the same sentence would be when she was visiting either Yuga or Kurenai in the relevant ward following the inevitable happening with the men they both denied they were romantically attached to. On the other hand, she had, by order of the Sandame, been restricted missions for an indeterminate period, at least until the end of the Chunin exams and quite possibly a bit beyond that, both to ensure there was no lasting effect due to Orochimaru using her seal and as punishment for jumping in where Tenchi feared to tread. So then, baby-sit one of Kakashi's brats for a month, or sit around drinking sake, eating dango and sitting on my cute behind. Tough choice. Very, very tough choice, but, overall. Throw in an all-you-can-eat dango binge at the local eatery and you got a deal, brat. She waited for just an instant, long enough for the child's ace to start to brighten in triumph, before she spoke again and added her last condition into the bargain. However, I've heard a lot about you Uzumaki, not much of it good, so here's the deal. For all the time I am teaching you, you will listen to every command I give and obey it as though it were the divine order of the kami himself. I will not tolerate arguing, brattiness or general pissing me off. If you've got a question or a valid concern, you will point it out in a logical manner and calm tone. Anything else and I walk. You won't find me again. Sound fair? Naruto cocked his head at this for a moment, apparently thinking the bargain over before, eventually, nodding his assent. At this, Anko promptly switched masks and gave an excited squeal. Okay then, my now cute little blood bag. Let's get started with a light jog all the way to the dango stand. After that we'll call it a day, as I've got stuff I need to do before I start training you. And sorry sensei, I have stuff I need to do as well, Naruto interjected smoothly, hands moving up to behind his head as a pair of brown eyes narrowed towards him. Oh, and what's so important that you have to skip out on quality bonding time with your new sensei? Can't really say here, Anko-sensei. After surreptitiously glancing around, the Jinchuriki ducked his head towards her own and let out a whisper. Let's just say the theme wasn't the only one who got hit by a snake in the forest and leave it at that. At those words, Naruto stood back up, seeing the blank expression that seemed to have struck Anko dumb for the time being and wondering if he'd be able to wangle a visit to Gigi before the day was out. Before he could do much more than visualize the thought, however, he found a fist jerking him upwards and almost off his feet as, with a yike, he was hoiked up onto his tiptoes and eye to eye with a suddenly lethal-looking snake mistress. You mean that poisonous bastard got his fangs into you, and you never said a thing? You baka, I should be nailing you to the wall just for being bloody stupid after a stunt like that. I tried. The Jinchuriki managed to wheeze through the strangulation hold. Just about resisting the temptation to make the kunoichi let go on the grounds that his chakra control was too much of a mess to use his best techniques and, apart from that, the unexplained disappearance of a special joining would likely raise a lot of awkward questions he couldn't be asked to answer right now, but we got in just before the preliminaries, couldn't talk to Kakashi-sensei. I was just about to go to Gigi, the Hokage. Well, scratch that and come with me. Dropping her new student, Anko immediately looked around her environment, sizing up the situation with a critical eye. Okay, no one overheard us, but they might come in at any minute. We need privacy for this, aha. That'll do. We're going to see what that theme left on you in case you're a risk to the third. Take it from me, there's no one better in the ninja world at manipulating the reckless and downright stupid than Orochimaru. Hey, I'm not stupid, he caught me off guard. Naruto made to argue his corner before he realized exactly where he was being dragged towards and dug his heels in. Hey, no, I can't go in there, it's necessary, the kunoichi assured him, pushing open the door to the ladies with one hand while throwing Naruto towards one of the cubicles with the other. Get in there now. I don't like it any more than you do, but until we can get somewhere more private and out of the way, this'll have to do. Any grumbling Naruto might have wanted to do was quashed by the serious expression Anko impaled him with, and, as quickly if the floor were on fire, he shot into one of the unoccupied cubicles, the snake mistress squeezing in behind him and bolting the door shut. Right then, turning back around, Anko glanced down as much as she was able to and, had the situation not been so grim, would probably have chuckled at the blush present on the Uzumaki's bewhiskered cheeks. Jump on there and show me what I'm dealing with. Hurry up, she growled. Naruto snapping to attention and hopping up onto the closed lid of the latrine at the same time as untucking his shirt. I don't have all day. Let me guess you'd rather be down the dango shack. Naruto snorted, pulling up the top half of his jumpsuit. Well, I'd rather be paying Ichiraku Ramen a visit, but we don't always get what we want, do we? Right then, what do you think of this? When I can see something, I'll let you know. Huh. Oh, yeah. Well, say something next time. It's not easy to know if the damn thing's on show or not. Channel some chakra through it, that should make it stand out. I'm trying, the Jinchuriki grated back, trying to force the sluggish flow of his energy through his coils, a process that his recent match with Kiba hadn't helped at all. This isn't the best of situations for me, you know. There, that should do it. Peering down at the spidery scrawl of the seal that kept the most formidable of the 9 Biju locked up, Anko couldn't even begin to understand what it actually did, but, as the boy began to pant with the effort of focusing his chakra and more kanji appeared around his navel, she had a shrewd idea of what was wrong with it. 3, 4, damn, odd seal over even seal. I was never any good at fuinjutsu, and is this thing is all that's stopping Big Red and raging from kicking through Konoha like a house of matches? I doubt it'd be a good idea for a novice to go poking at it. He needs an expert, and the Sandame's the best we've got. I doubt he's much of a threat at the minute. Looks like the extra seal's hindering him more than anything else, so it's probably safe to turn him loose for now, though if he forgets my dango. Letting the threatening thought go unfinished while she thought up a suitable punishment for the Gaki should he fail to honor his end of the bargain, Anko stood back to her full height and nodded at him to drop his shirt. Okay, that didn't take long. Sort yourself out. You look a mess. From you, that's rich. Just for once in his life, Naruto did the smart thing and kept his mouth shut as his new sensei made to turn around. Sorry kid, problem like that's too big for me to handle. You need to speak to someone with more experience in the subject, so yeah, the big cheese would be your best bet. When you're done there, I'll be expecting you at the dango shack. Do not take too long. Since when's that been a problem? The genin grumbled. Despite the fact Gigi lived there, he hated the Hokage Tower. Most of the other ninja there sneered at him or ignored him outright. Anko heard this as she turned back around to let herself out and bit back a sigh, remembering her own experiences in the aftermath of being discovered by Konoha following 2 years or so riding her former sensei's coattails. As a result of this, her mood was fouler than normal as she stepped out the cubicle, and the sight of a medical ninja there, likely a chunin due to their size and fresh-faced appearance, whipping around to look at her with an expression akin to a startled deer didn't help matters in the slightest. What? Anko snapped harshly, causing the other kunoichi to tremble, though unusually the younger ninja didn't back down. Instead, she dared peek around Anko towards the other occupant of the booth, and her eyes widened to the size of soup dishes. Naruto's doing likewise, though before anyone could say anything the med nin simply crumpled to the floor, an expression of shock on her face that was marred only by a trickle of blood seeping out her nose as she lay comatose on the floor. What the, oh. As she looked from the passed out girl to Naruto and back again, the pieces flew together in Anko's mind and she found herself torn between gagging and giggling. The things we said, oh, this is just Cammy pulling my chain. First I end up with a student. Now if she wakes up and opens her mouth, my gutter low reputation's going to be on a slide straight into the sewer. Okay. This is bad but not the worst it could be. Ah. Oh no. I've killed her. She must have thought I was a pervert and had a heart attack. Okay. Now it's the worst it could be. Thinking and talking later, running now. She was just fast enough. Even as the door to the ablutions room burst open in response to Naruto's panicked shout, all the would-be rescuers were left to see was a scattering of leaves, a cubicle door banging open and shut, and a passed-out medic with a wide smile on her face lying on the floor unconscious. I wonder why Anko-sensei never wanted me to mention that. Up until that point I didn't think she felt shame due to the way she dresses. Ah, never mind really. And he didn't really mind all that much, despite the fact he now had. As Konoha and the world had found out during the Chunin exams, techniques in his arsenal that could potentially wipe people off the face of the planet as though they'd never existed. Such had been the sincerity in Anko's voice when she promised all the nasty, horrible things she would do to him if he breathed so much of a word of what had happened after they'd reappeared following her shunshin, dropping them in an alleyway at the back of the hospital, that he believed her without further question and subconsciously scrubbed all those memories from his mind. Fortunately the Sandaime made the save, probably without meaning to, the old man nodding sagely as he too recalled the last time he'd seen his ward prior to the day of the finals. Yes, I can confirm that is truth. Uzumaki Naruto did see me on that day and I did remove a Gogyo Fuin that overlays the Shiki Fuin holding back his Biju. Not that I had much choice in the matter. I wanted to wait for Jiraiya to get his act together and see his godson, but the fact he came to me with a glaring problem would have made it look too suspicious if I'd not done anything about it. The thought of his tardy student and how he'd let down not just his sensei but his godson as well was another dismal memory that plagued the Sandaime, though to his credit Jiraiya was deeply remorseful that he'd missed an opportunity for family bonding, as Naruto had been all but invisible up until he'd torn apart the competition, amongst other things, at the Chunin exams. At least the old man's mind was eased about where the Jinchuriki had been throughout that month. Deny it though she might, Anko was at least a safe pair of hands if nothing else, though as another voice spoke out from the shinobi side of the council. Fascinating as this all is, came the cold, clear voice of the Hyuga clan head, Hiyashi's pupilless eyes not moving from where the monster who had both blown apart the strength of the Hyuga and humiliated his nephew into the bargain sat, looking supremely unconcerned that he'd just made an enemy of one of the most prestigious clans of Konoha, and Hayashi would, if given the chance, personally toss him into the deepest, darkest cell the Anbu had to offer and throw the key away without a second. Though, can we get back to the matter at hand? You were trained by Mitarashi Anko, correct? I think that's what I said. What? You need someone to translate what I'm saying into posh speak for you. Gritting his teeth and making a mental note to maim Inuzuka Sume at the next convenient opportunity as she snickered aloud at the devil boy's wit, Hayashi masterfully maintained his grip on his temper and explained his reasoning. No, I merely wish to know what techniques you learnt from Anko-san that allowed you to fulfill the vow you made to Hyuga Neji so thoroughly. Fulfill the, oh you mean kick him until the stick dropped out of it. Funny that, actually, Naruto admitted, secretly smirking to himself as it appeared the wild-haired ninja woman seemed to agree with him, nearly biting her hand and not daring to even glance at Hiyashi as she heard the pompous dolt's ego get the hammering it was long overdue, because if I'd used the techniques I know on his properly there would have been nothing left of it but the stick by the time I was through with him. Standing upright and stretching off, Anko heaved out a yawn as her new charge waited for her to finish, idly glancing around him at the new training area until a sudden flash of steel heading towards him had him frantically scrambling backwards, glaring at the special jonin with sudden anger in his eyes as he swore vociferously. Hey, what was that for you, psycho? Good. You seem to be learning to keep an eye on your surroundings. Maybe that'll keep your full head on your shoulders in the future. Or, maybe it won't. It's all in the lap of the kami at the end of the day. Anyway, apart from that, Anko's face hardened and her voice retracted into a business-like manner as she spoke again. Naruto, forgetting his earlier temper to pay rapt attention to the older ninja. I had a look at your file the other night and, overall, you. Strange. Thought he'd get angry at that. Still, give it time. You're hot-headed. Don't plan much beyond the next 5 seconds. Virtually no jutsu of any note. Your taijutsu would give street brawling a bad name, and the less said about your chakra control the better. I won't lie to you, kid. The chances of you laying out the Hyuga after 29 or so days are about as long as someone talking Kurenai-chan into streaking the male onsen. Kurenai. Kuren. Wait, you mean Hinata-chan sensei. The sudden swerve in conversation caught Anko slightly on the hop. Did he just not hear me take him apart as a ninja? He should be flying off the handle by now. The first vague suspicions something was slightly amiss here were prickling the back of Anko's mind and only got louder as the genin went on. Yeah, doesn't sound like the kind of thing she'd do, unlike you who'd probably have a go at it just for giggles. Still though, which files were you reading? When were they last updated? Not for the first time. Lack of recalling fine details came back to haunt the special jonin, along with trying to read such a messy handwriting as Kakashi's through a thick pair of sake goggles. Not sure. About 6 months, maybe. Naruto seemed to accept this and nodded, mostly to himself. That explains it then. Kakashi-sensei must have written them. Guess he's not quite as good at looking underneath the underneath as he thinks he is. Well, that'll just make it even more fun when I get around to trashing Sasuke Tem after Neji's eaten his slice of humble pie. Anko chuckled before sliding her left leg out behind her smoothly, the opening stance of her personal fighting style as she raised an eyebrow at her new charge. Well, you've got your heart in the right place, Gaki. Head might be all over the place, but that's a different sack of kanai. So then, just to see how accurate these files are, we're going to have a little all-out spar. Depending on how long you last, I'll tailor my torture regimen until I'm certain you won't crap out and die on me until the finals are here. Truth be told, Anko had been expecting the kid to leap at her as she'd heard he'd done during his genin exam, but, to her slight surprise, instead of adopting a stance, he grinned up at her, one hand behind his neck in a gesture she'd come to expect when he was feeling sheepish or embarrassed about something. I'm not sure that's such a good idea, Anko-sensei. Oh come on, future Hokage, the snake summoner drawled in a sultry tone, hoping to provoke him into making a mistake and handing her an easy win. Kid's a prankster after all, might be trying to lull me in. You wanna win the big hat and the hand of your lady fair, you're gonna have to go up against meaner mofos than little old me. Come on, I already said I wasn't going to kill you. With that and no further warning, Anko sprang into a standard, close combat attack. True to her word, she wasn't going all out. In fact, she was barely even scraping Chunin level, as any competent ninja would have dodged the straightforward strike and been inside her guard in an instant. And what do you know? Her eyebrow rose as Naruto, rather than freezing in shock as she'd been expecting, managed to dodge her punch by a whisker and use his small stature to duck to the outside of her arm, his retaliation coming in the form of a single palm shooting towards her. He actually isn't quite as bad as I'd. Her thought got no further than that. There was a sudden tap on her side, about level with her stomach, that she barely felt through her chainmail and thick abdominal muscles, a sensation that felt like he'd burst a balloon containing freezing water onto her, and then the world started tilting crazily as she felt herself being thrown base over apex backwards, a sound like an explosion making her ears ring even as her reflexes took over and she rolled with the impact. Even with this reaction, she hit the ground hard though, wheezing as the breath whooshed out her lungs and left her gasping to recover, completely unprepared for the explosive tag or whatever the hell else the kid had used. Her entire stomach felt both numb and battered at the same time, making her growl in pain as she tried to sit up in the damage, just about managing this task as she forced her head to stop spinning from the impact and take in exactly what the hell just happened. Naruto was standing with his arms still outstretched, exactly the position he'd been when he made contact with her, the only difference being that she was now about 15 feet from where she'd started, with an impressive impact and roll mark in the ground that led to her current prostrate position. Panting to try and recover the air that had flown out of her, the snake mistress was left trying to come to terms with what had just hit her before Naruto, slowly dropping his arm, gazed down at her and sighed. "Sorry about that, sensei." And he truly did seem apologetic as he let out a sheepish sort of smile before carrying on. "But that's what I meant when I said I didn't want to go all out. Not being boastful at all, but if I don't get it right, I'd probably wind up killing you without meaning to." Normally Anko would have laughed at this. The idea that a genin, no matter how skilled, could take down a special jonin was laughable after all. But the fact of the matter was her gut ached like all merry hell and her knees were shaking as she scrabbled to her feet, both hands on her belly and channeling one of the few medical techniques she knew to her wound as she tried to breathe a little easier. Any higher I'd have lost a floating rib, or even more if I'd been unlucky. Damn, what the hell was in that punch, and why wasn't it in his files? Instead, slightly more humble than before, the special jonin gingerly approached her protege and stopped a respectable distance from him. For a minute neither spoke, merely staring each other down until, eventually, Anko was the one to break the silence. "Okay, Gaki." Her voice was a lot more serious than before and laced with respect as she nodded towards his hand. "What the hell was that?" "One of my techniques, one of the ones I've never used before except on a shadow clone," he admitted, shrugging, but at the same time, he could see, slightly concerned for her sake as he checked her pose out the corner of his eye. Ah, how sweet. Checking his sensei is okay. Give him a few years and he'll be a really good catch for any kunoichi who finally gets her head out her when it comes to Sasuke, bloody Uchiha. I didn't think it'd be as explosive as that, but I knew it wouldn't take you out in one hit. I didn't have contact long enough." Contact. You need to touch someone to get that ability to work. That sounds like an ability I heard about in Iowa some time ago, making things explode with a touch. You sure you've not got a bloodline or something, kid? If so, then I'm sure as hell not the best person to teach you how to get a handle on it. To her relief, however, Naruto merely chuckled. Nah, no bloodline, just the result of a bit of good luck, a crappy apartment and a hell of reading and writing. Okay. He saw the confusion and interest on her face almost as soon as it appeared. Let me show you everything I can do, put all my cards on the table, and then I'll tell you what's going on and what I need from you as a sensei. Sound fair enough? Hearing this and completely at sea about what to expect from the suddenly dangerous genin before her, Anko could merely nod and watch as the orange-wearing Jinchuriki, apparently heaving down a sigh, turned his back towards her, brought his hands towards his face for some reason and then, without warning, suddenly ran towards the copse of trees at the back of the training ground. A half-minute later, and with his demonstration completed, Anko, for the second time in a month, found herself staring at someone who, for all intents and purposes, seemed to hold her life in his hands, as the form of her student strode out of the haze of smoke left in his wake with a serious expression, one that ripped off the mask of cheerful ignorance he must have hidden himself, or at least part of himself, behind. She was all at once intrigued, frightened and very, very impressed. As she beheld the barren wasteland that had once been a verdant wood, Anko fought to stop her spine from freezing as she swallowed down a deep breath and looked over at where her pupil now knelt, apparently winded after releasing his power on so many innocent trees. Okay then, Naruto. It was a mark of how serious she felt the situation was that she used his name rather than an endearing insult, a single thought in her mind the whole time. If it truly came down to an all-out brawl, could I honestly beat this kid? I've got range, experience and more techniques than him, but if he can do this with just his hands, it was a thought she didn't want to finish and so she spoke to overcome her slight hesitation. You can. Well actually I have no idea what you're doing but since whatever it was managed to completely vaporize half a forest, I'm going to assume it's a killing technique if used on a person. The Jinchuriki was a little too busy recapturing his breath to answer immediately but, when he did, it was with a pale imitation of his usual grin of his face as he pushed himself painfully to his feet. Well, there's a bit of theoretical mumbo-jumbo regarding the death label for it. I'll explain when you see this last one. He took a step forwards. Anko sprang back a dozen yards. Oh hell no way, she protested, eyes wide as a kunai snapped into her hands out of reflex. After what I just saw, I'm pretty sure it's safe to say you're one guy in Konoha who's never getting his hands on me. More like the only guy. Naruto muttered under his breath before trying again. Look, you've already felt this one. I know 3 techniques. There's the one that makes things go bang, the one that makes things go poof, and this one that goes slurp. Just stand still and I promise I won't bang you again. Anko's eyes shot open at his apparent cheek but, seeing nothing but innocence in his eyes, chalked it up grudgingly as an unintentional double entendre and denied her inner worry. Not moving and holding out an arm as Naruto shambled forwards though, as he reached for her, she was quick to give a final warning. Anything goes wrong with this and you'll have the entire T&I department on your avenging my death. They know where I am and who I'm with. Naruto merely rolled his eyes before, gently, placing his hand on her arm. Anko saw it a split second before her entire arm and most of her right side went numb and she almost toppled over. Between the contact of the Jinchuriki and her arm was a sudden flash of white. Before she could press the question, she was left hissing as a sensation similar to pins and needles flooded her body, but it was nothing to do with pinched nerves or blood circulation. Instead, as Naruto hold her up and she felt her strength returning somewhat, she managed to speak through tingling lips. That was my chakra. You attacked my chakra coils. Was that some kind of Jiyuken rip-off? Not quite. Naruto grunted, holding up his sensei's side even if he knew better than to make a comment about her weight. He'd done that once with Sakura-chan and the results had been anything but nice. It's like that guy in the preliminaries, the one Sasuke Tem kicked into next week. I can drain chakra like he can but much better. If that had been me down there, the Uchiha Tem would have been out cold the second I had held him. Gradually feeling what remained of her chakra trickle back through her coils. Damn, about 2/3 full. Even with the techniques I'd used before. He ripped out a quarter of a special jonin's chakra reserves in, contact of a second or less. Kami damn it. Once more she felt a cold sweat on the back of her neck. He pulls that crap out in the preliminaries and that's it. Game over. He'd kill a genin through the chakra exhaustion without even meaning to. No, he wouldn't, Gaki. He'd be dead, she said in all seriousness, once more having to reassess the threat this nondescript Gaki in bright orange seemed to pose. As far as I can see right now, you're quite possibly the most lethal genin in the entire exam. Heck, even that Sandman kid wouldn't last a minute against you, draining the damned life out of him. At this, Naruto made a curious expression somewhere between pride and annoyance as he looked away from his sensei. He wouldn't, if I could use that damned technique right. Right. The idea that a move that powerful wasn't complete was quite frankly terrifying. What? I mean, I can only use it when I've not got full chakra reserves. Naruto cut her off, having preempted her question. If I try to use it full, And I have once or twice on seals containing chakra. It's like trying to force water into a full bottle. It blows up right in my face, and believe me, chakra burns ain't fun. That much I can agree with. Okay Naruto. Give it to me straight here. Finally able to stand without aid, Anko pushed herself a few paces away and stared her student down, seriousness lacing her expression and penetrating gaze, and she asked the now pressing question, why the hell did you come and find me? You don't need me. Hell, even if that thing you use there's got its limits, you could simply use either one of the others, and anyone you come up against is going to be either a squishy little smear on the arena walls or a cloud of smoke. If this is about avenging that girl the Hyuga prick put in the hospital, you don't need any help with that, you're good to go on your own. Now the ball's in his court. Let's see what he can do with it. Anko had an idea that Naruto knew his techniques were inherently dangerous, hence why he'd never used them until Neji's callous actions had driven him to vengeful fury, but she doubted he knew just how dangerous they actually were in reality. As far as she could work out, even a simple taijutsu exchange could end with an enemy mysteriously vanished as though he'd never been there, and in the time it took any buddies he might have had with him to register the fact their friend was gone, Naruto would have been quick enough to take them out as well. Even as this though crossed her mind, however, the Jinchuriki looked up at her, his face fixed in the same smile he'd been wearing when he tracked her down in the hospital the previous day, the smirk of a man who knew he had already won and was just waiting for the exact right moment to spring his final surprise. You're half right, sensei. Technically I am good to go. I could destroy the competition out there with next to no effort, even Neji Baka, but that's not what I want to do, least of all to him. His expression darkened suddenly, an almost unholy glee in his face and voice as he looked at her directly. I could kill Neji easily, but that's not enough for what he's done. I want to break him, leave him laying in the dirt in front of everyone, knowing that he's been totally outclassed, that he never stood a kami damned chance, and with only the shattered shards of everything he's ever believed in his company in his misery, just like he tried to do to Hinata-chan. That's why I came to you. I heard of your reputation of being able to smash through anyone given time. I know my techniques are too powerful for this exam. One touch right now and Neji would be as near to dead as it'd make no difference, so that's no good. I need you, Anko-sensei, to make me more than just an unstoppable force, a battering ram. That's pointless for a ninja. I need to be absolutely sure everything I do does the damage I want it to do and no more. That's why I came to you. His eyes narrowed and the snake mistress swore she could see flames dancing in them, evil, terrible flames that would shame even the Kyuubi no Kitsune should it be able to see them from behind its seal as he made his request plain. I need you to turn me into a stiletto blade. That way I can choose if it'll be death by 1,000 cuts, just like Neji's going to feel, or one swift stab to the heart that they never see coming. I'm already a potential destroyer, the seals see to that. All you need to do is work a bit of your magic and turn me into someone who can take a target alive as well as he can make sure the guy he's after is left as nothing but a memory. Sounds like something you can manage, sensei. Anko took in and let out a deep breath, then another, trying to mask her shock as she realized this wasn't the same kid she'd tagged with a kunai some 9 days before. This was someone she doubted even Kakashi, or possibly even the Sandaime himself, had ever seen. This was a ninja who had a veritable arsenal of lethal weapons and, knowing he lacked the skill to use them effectively, had sought out the services of someone who might have an idea of how to tame the monsters he had created. Hey, you're not asking for much, are you, Gaki? She joked, folding her arms as he smirked a little at her humor before becoming more serious just as she did. Still, as I am your sensei, I heard Kakashi Baka talking about getting the paperwork filled in last night in the Junin lounge. It's now my duty to at least try and sort this whole damned mess out. Still, you gotta throw me a bone here, kid. She sat down cross-legged, gesturing for Naruto to do the same as her right leg was still a little tingling from the technique the Uzumaki had used. I saw glimpses but nothing more. What the hell did you actually do just then? A question as valid then as it is now. Hayashi spoke into the hushed chamber, disturbing the remembering of Anko and the few corrections Naruto made as she went on. What did happen in that training ground that day that led to your contribution to the debacle that was the Chunin exams? Hey, you call it a debacle but I enjoyed it, Naruto pointed out as he folded his arms and glared right back at the Hyuga, affronted by his slander. Besides, weren't you listening just then? Anko-sensei said. What happened? She asked for a demonstration of my techniques and I obliged. But what techniques are these? Hayashi thundered, patience wearing thin as the charade of this explanation grated on him. How does a boy with what was considered, at best, limited potential in the ninja arts develop an apparently new branch of ninjutsu that not only beats others of his peer group? Despite his reputation, Hayashi was a fair man and, as Neji was a genin, as far as the Hyuga was concerned, that made him a peer of the dead last, but also virtually saved our village from invasion. I have a hard time believing you could have hidden it from us. Why not? I mean, your clan managed to hide the effect of the hair dye that got snuck into your conditioner deliveries a few months ago well enough, didn't they? Hiyashi went crimson, Byakugan activating unconsciously as he whipped his face down the table and glared venomously. That was you. Naruto raised his arms. I never said I did it and you can't prove anything, he pointed out reasonably, once more thinly amused by the expressions of the other clan heads as he shoved a pin through the bubble of the Hyuga's pride, but sadly the cat's out the bag on this one. I was forced to reveal my hand at the Chunin exams and, as I am now aware, it's my duty as a ninja of Konoha to reveal these potentially damaging secrets before they become a risk to the village. So, he clapped once. All attention back on him as he beamed broadly. I'd better get down to that, but before I do I'd like to dedicate a moment of appreciation to my sensei please, because, without her, for the first time in a very long time, Mitarashi Anko almost blushed as she was singled out to the crowd. Naruto craning his neck back over his chair and providing a lopsided grin as he went on, my techniques wouldn't have been anywhere near as devastating as they turned out to be. Just about levering herself back to one knee, Anko winced as she flexed her fingers and looked over at the child who was examining her with expectant eyes. Damn kid, you're in exalted company right now, the snake summoner informed him, a wry smirk on her lips as the feeling came back. Not many other guys in this place manage to make me go as weak at the knees as easily as you do. Naruto merely chuckled. Ah, call it a gift. Seriously though sensei, how was it? About an armful, maybe a bit less. A lot better than before but still a bit more than the average genin can handle being taken in one. If you really want to handle the Hyuga like you said you did, you need at most a tenth of what you just took then. The Jinchuriki scowled at this news. Damn, yet more chakra control exercises then. Wasn't the being chased across water by snakes while sensei throws interesting things at me exercise bad enough? Before sighing and making ready to carry on. Okay, not too bad then, still got 3 weeks to go. Are you ready to rumble again sensei? Anko held a hand up. Give me a minute kid, we're not all blessed with your legendary endurance. Shame. If we all were you'd never go home dissatisfied. At this point Naruto ducked the kunai, chucked his way with ease of long practice, and Anko scowled before becoming slightly more serious, eyes clouded by thought as she put a finger in her mouth, thinking hard. And apart from that, there was something else I was wondering about, that move you just did. Yeah, the slurp. Typical. My student has a potentially game-breaking technique pretty much dropped into his lap, and what does he call it? No, not the Hiraishin, or the Shiki Fuin, that'd be way too boring and cool. Instead, he calls it slurp. Masking her inner revulsion, the T&I operative plowed on. I know you said you couldn't use it when you had full chakra. What happened when you tried to? Come on, if there's one thing I've learned about you in a week, it's that given a choice you'll go trial and error, with the emphasis most definitely on the latter of them. Try as he might to come up with an argument to this, Naruto swiftly found there wasn't one and, instead, was left to shrug and hold up one hand. Wasn't pretty and hurt like hell. Didn't go to the med nins cause they hate me, but as far as I can gather the extra chakra started to fry my coils. I had to simply burst it out of me before it did any more damage. It was agony sensei, and this is coming from the guy who shoved a kunai into the back of his hand because it seemed like a good idea at the time. As far as I can work out, there's no way I can use that technique when I'm full without blowing myself up from the inside out. So, you're saying that the only reason you can't use that seal of yours to full effect is that you can't handle the extra chakra. That's about right. Not like it really matters though. If there's one thing the Kage Bunshin's good for, it's drinking chakra. Hee hee. Huh. Sorry sensei. You say something. Ha ha hey hey. A sweat drop duly began sliding its way down the back of the Jinchuriki's neck. Anko sensei. Something wrong. Hee 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 ha 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 quadruple A. Okay. Seriously, you're starting to freak me out now. These words at last seemed to sink in and broke the kunoichi of her manic giggling fit as she stared at him with a new, rapacious expression in her eyes, licking her lips as she stared him up and down. Gaki, she said breathlessly, the shining in her gaze not dimming in the slightest. Forget the chakra control at the minute. Forget the seal techniques. In fact, forget everything. There is something else you need to learn, and you need to learn it now. I hope you can heal as fast as the records say you do, because I won't lie to you, this is going to hurt like all hell, but if you can master it, you'll never have to worry about taking a little extra chakra into your coils ever again. It was at this point that Anko managed a seemingly impossible feat, as she managed to look simultaneously sheepish and smug at the same time. Yeah, not something I originally planned to teach him, or anyone else for that matter. But the fact of the matter was it does work. Seeing the skeptical looks around the council room, she went on, scratching the back of her head in a move that almost had Sarutobi reaching for the packet of painkillers he kept secreted in a hidden drawer of his desk. I know that look. So, what did I teach him then? Well, it's a way to, forcibly engorge the body's natural chakra capacity by unleashing the hidden potential. It was at this point that someone else, the member of the clan with the largest chakra reserves in the leaf who had been foremost in the development of the techniques he was afraid Anko might have revealed, groaned and slapped a meaty palm over his face, the loud smack making everyone else look over as Akamichi Shuza dragged his palm over his eyes and fixed the kunoichi with a bale glare. Anko-chan, please, for the love of all that is and may ever be holy, please. Tell me you didn't teach Uzumaki Naruto, the one-child permanent sugar rush, how to open his hachiman. The resultant silence almost made the Anbu hidden in the room break down and cry. Even though it had been almost a year since his graduation, memories of very long chases and even more embarrassing traps took a long time to forget. Anko, despite the situation and the apparent redness of his face, the snake mistress thought Sarutobi seemed to be taking things rather well. You have until I can get my blood pressure back into triple digits to say something that might make me reconsider stripping you of any and all rank you might even consider holding in the future. And Naruto, how many gates did that lunatic teach you to open? Only the first two, Gigi, and don't blow a fuse, the Jinchuriki commented lazily, the Sandame's advisors slowly edging away from the seated cage as the noise of teeth being ground into nubs began to reach their ears. It's easier for people with large reserves to break the gates down because the actual increase isn't as big for us. Anko sensei said why she was taught the technique. If her bastard of a sensei's seal ever awoke, she can break her gates and basically flood his chakra under her own, no matter how powerful it is. So I guess you'll be teaching Sasuke the same thing soon, right, sensei? Visibly startled by his name, the copy nin wiped the glaze from his single eye and managed a wobbly kind of grin as he beheld the beaming face of his apparently now lethal student. With Sandame Sama's permission, of course, he managed weakly, The third Hokage trying hard to control both his breathing and his temper by this point as visions of what he could legally get away with doing to the terminally irresponsible special jonin who'd taught his grandson such dangerous techniques flitted through his mind like nin ken chasing their tails. Pain gloves, boiling oil, red-hot needles, tickle torture. No. For later, right now let's get the council dissolved then figure out ways of hiding the body. I will deal with that issue presently, the old man proclaimed before deciding to get the worst of it over with before the gleam in Danzo's single eye got too much brighter as he appraised the Jinchuriki before him like a new kunai. For now though we have more pressing concerns. I can accept that the Hachiman overcame your limitations with one of your 3 techniques, so now I ask you to demonstrate what these techniques are, what they can actually do and how you came by them in Uzumaki Naruto. What happens when I do that, Gigi? I mean, he hastily made his intentions plain as the rest of the council narrowed their eyes at him simultaneously. Man, is there some sort of trick they've got to let them know how to do that? It's freaky. I won't have to give them away, will I? I made them myself. Trying to make me give them up would be like telling the Inuzuka to give every ninja a nin-ken, or get the Yamanaka to tell people how to waltz around in someone's head. Seeing the potential sticking point and profoundly grateful that the civilian council wasn't present to throw further oil on the fire by demanding Naruto to spill his secrets, Sarutobi was able to make a binding decree before anyone else on the council got any ideas. No one will force you to do anything, Naruto-san, you have my word on that, he said calmly, and, with those words, the truculence drained out the Jinchuriki and he sat back in his seat content. Fine. Suits me, Gigi. Thanks for that. Okay. First thing you need to know is that what I do isn't ninjutsu, it's all fuinjutsu. The sealing arts. The thought of a shinobi is inherently reckless as Naruto playing around with one of the most obscure and dangerous branches of ninja techniques was nearly enough to make half of the council reach for the smelling salts, though Sarutobi had to hide a smirk as he realized that the bloodline had bred true. You are truly your father's son, Naruto-kun, and from what happened that day in the Chunin exams, I would have to say you may have already moved out of his shadow. I actually discovered it, or at least, most of it by accident through accidental fuinjutsu. Shikaku Nara was not the only ninja looking worried after hearing those words in tandem. How exactly did this come about? Naruto merely shrugged. Uruka-sensei was showing us some of the basic storage seals, said our homework was to take a sealing tag, practice sealing things into and out of it and then make a copy of the matrix, but no more than that, we'd learn how to use them when we became genin. I went home and, well, I was never a good student, dropped the seal he'd given me onto the table and forgot about it, he put delicately, remembering the prank that had actually gone on that night and not wanting to embarrass any of the ninja present more than was absolutely necessary. Least of all the clans who look like they're on my side at the minute. So, I wake up next morning ready to start the work but, well, put bluntly my apartment's rubbish. It rained in the night and my whole kitchen leaked. Everything got covered with water including the sealing tag, but by the time I got up it had dried off as well, stuck to the table face down. I thought that was it. I was screwed. I tried to peel it off slowly but when I did it was faded. Most of the matrix was left on the table, I couldn't see enough of it to draw. So there I was left in my soaking kitchen, thinking I'm going to get chewed out by Uruka-sensei and with a load of ink graffiti all over the table. I was furious, absolutely had it and lashed out, hit the table with chakra in my fist, when there was a sudden explosion of smoke from the seal and when it cleared it was gone. What? Caught slightly flat-footed by the abrupt end to the rambling tale of Wo Inoichi sought further clarity, the seal. No, the table. How? That's what I was wondering at first, Naruto explained, readying his chakra in his fingertip as he made to demonstrate his newfound field in the sealing arts. So I sat down and thought about it, thought so hard I lost track of time and skipped the academy morning classes. Uruka-sensei was about to blow the place down before I showed him the tag and said my roof leaked in the night. I was trying to copy it down right all morning. Neat little sob story. After that he said it was okay and gave me another tag to practice on. I went home, looked at the tag, played with it a bit and remembered what had happened before I realized exactly what I'd done to the tag and why my table had disappeared. It wasn't gone, it had just been sealed away forever. A ripple of consternation spread throughout the council chamber. Neighbors swapping glances and muttered statements before, with brows knitted, Sarutobi sought further clarification. I don't quite follow Naruto-kun. What do you mean when you say sealed away forever? I mean that this whole thing was an accident that paid off big time for me. The Jinchuriki began, slowly explaining the situation for the benefits of all concerned. When the rain soaked my sealing tag and I peeled it off the table, it left a face-down image of the storage seal on the table. When I then hit that upside-down seal with a chakra-coated fist, I triggered it and it sealed the table. However, because the seal wasn't drawn onto anything, it didn't have anything to seal the table into other than itself. As soon as the seal was complete, the matrix was destabilized because it had sealed away the very thing it was inscribed onto, like the snake that ate its own tail until it consumed itself. Everything I've used, all of my techniques are based off the two most basic seals anyone can learn. With that, he threw both hands forwards and focused as he had thousands of times before. The entire council leaning backwards as from the palms of his hands twin constructs of blue chakra appeared, though as he squinted into the shining blue chakra the Sandame couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Those are definitely kanji, made of pure chakra. Naruto-kun, when did you get so skilled? The left one, the Jinchuriki intoned, looking over his hands towards the now stunned faces of the most powerful ninja of his village, is the inverted storage seal, the one that makes things go poof. When I hit somebody or something I don't like, I form this seal from my chakra and it seals them in. While the sealing is going on, I take my hand away, leaving more than enough residual chakra in the seal to get the job done and seal my enemy completely. As soon as the thing it's been left on is sealed away or it runs out of chakra, the seal either consumes itself or dissipates. Either way, whatever's in there is simply never coming out. It is a quite literal touch of death. The second one, on the right, is an inverted chakra storage seal. This can either be used when the seal is in direct contact with my skin, in which case the chakra it seals from my enemy goes directly into my coils. He calls that the slurp. Anko chipped in with a grin before falling silent as everyone, Naruto included, looked over at her for the interruption before Naruto sighed and took back the reins of the conversation. Which, thanks to the training in the Hachiman Anko-sensei gave me, have enlarged enough for me to absorb quite significant amounts of chakra from external sources and use them to power moves usually only used by those who've opened their celestial gates. On the other hand, if I plant this seal on someone and then let go, so the seal's no longer in contact with me, things tend to get a bit more explosive, he drawled, an evil smile on his lips as he remembered the happy memories from a few days ago as he had demonstrated to the world at large just how much of a bang his techniques could have. Chakra can't be contained like physical objects can. As soon as the seal matrix is destabilized, the chakra it's sealed is released violently. The more chakra, or in my case the more contact I've had with my target to drain chakra and the closer they are to the seal when I let it go, the bigger the bang and the more damage it does. The explosion usually doesn't reach me because I'm stood behind the matrix and the chakra is released outwards, like an exploding charge rather than an exploding tag. So, in conclusion, thanks to these inverted seals I can either steal all your chakra and then make it blow up and blow you away, or simply erase you from existence entirely. 3 techniques, 3 ways to take someone down, and if you want to know just how effective 2 of them are. He gave a gruff snort of laughter, meeting one of the council members' eye to pupilless white eye as he smiled in vengeful victory. Just ask Neji Baka. Today, Uzumaki Naruto thought to himself as he nodded to Sakura-chan and headed for the stairs. It was going to be a good day. It certainly had all the potential of being one of the best days of his otherwise fairly miserable existence. First of all, Anko-sensei had been on hand to wake him up and wish him luck for the finals in a way only she could manage, as well as drop a slip of paper into one of the pockets of his jumpsuit explaining what she expected as payment for her sensei's services while she was hugging him and he was trying to avoid being suffocated by her cleavage. The order he'd made with one of the weaponsmiths in the village via a hanged alias had come in on time and fitted like a dream and, best of all, by the end of the day Hinata-chan's life would be a lot more bearable and he, hopefully, would have a Chunin jacket to wear. Whistling idly with his hands in his pockets, Naruto kipped down the last few stairs and landed in a small puff of dust, sauntering out to the center of the arena where he opponent, victim, and the proctor waited. Hey, the Jinchuriki slowed but didn't stop as he actually noticed the proctor closely for the first time. What happened to the other guy? He had a mission come up. Genma lied easily, twirling his senbon across his lips as he watched the first two competitors, both of which appeared to have some kind of feud between them from what he'd heard on the grapevine, line up across from one another, the audience hushing as he raised his hand. Okay. Both of you, same rules as the preliminaries. You fight until one of you is dead, unconscious or withdraws. I will step in to prevent a fatality if I can. Ready? As expected, the Hyuga nodded, though strangely Naruto didn't react save to shrug his shoulders, as though this whole thing were a waste of his time. Damn. Looks like I owe Aoba 5 yen. I bet he'd be shooting his mouth off by now. Then Hajime. It was at this point Naruto smoothly slid his hands out of his pockets, dropped back into a stance and made ready his most infamous jutsu. Neji had been prepared to weather a fierce but, ultimately, pointless barrage before clinically dispatching this latest annoyance just as he had his weakling cousin some weeks ago. However, when Naruto appeared to defy convention if not fate by hanging back, the Hyuga merely smirked and spoke. You claimed you wanted my blood in payment for that of the loser Hinata-sama. I look forward to seeing your eyes when you see the intractable difference between a genius and a dead last. Bow down and accept your. Quote. He got no further, instead dropping back into his defensive stance as in a cloud of smoke replicas of the Uzumaki burst into being, the shadow clones darting away from their creator and moving to block Neji in a rough circle. The action made the Hyuga smirk. Even without his bloodline he'd be able to take down these few feeble clones in a heartbeat. But they did not press the attack immediately, instead holding back as the original, the real one, stepped forwards towards him. Madness. He thinks to fight me in taijutsu. He is even more of a fool than his pitiful record suggests. I don't have time to listen to bullcrap theme, the Uzumaki stated, his tone as close to Sasuke's usually bored disaffection as he could manage and, he noticed, working if the minuscule scowl on Neji's face was any indication. Typical genius, can't bear to be spoken down to. I'm here to kick your, so either I come there or you come here and let's start the kicking. Channeling chakra to his fingertips, Neji merely smiled. So be it, face your fate Uzumaki. With that, he moved into the attack, thrusting his fingers forwards towards the smaller child's sternum with the intention of blocking one of his major tenketsu. He wasn't expecting to hit anything. The attack was merely a diversion. He felt a slapping contact on his arm and smiled wolfishly as the enemy took the bait and would be helpless too. A numbing shock kissed his arm, the chakra that had been in his hand gone but almost before he realized that a wild explosion and force had slammed into his extended limb, the impact strong enough to bruise his tricep and spin him around in a clumsy pirouette. What was, even as he tried to work out what his opponent had done to him and a way to counter it, a thrusting punch landed in his kidneys, making him cry out before a second explosion catapulted him forwards. Helpless against the force of the blow as he stumbled, trying to stay on his feet only to see, with a sudden thrill of dread, one of the clones Naruto had made previously filling his vision, a cutthroat smile on its lips as it ghosted to the side to his headlong charge, sent its punch directly into his elbow block and blasted him away again, back towards another side of the rough circle. Pain and nausea clamoring in Neji's mind, the top rookie of his year activated his Byakugan, trying to see through his watering away to break out of the trap only to go flying once more. Another explosive push sending him cartwheeling as this time he impaled himself upon a lifting kick, the impact sending the breath hurtling from his lungs before the clone smirked and he was lifted off his feet by a second hammer blow to his gut. Dazed, dizzy and disorientated from the punishing barrage, Neji could barely see where he was flying and had no time to recover a defenses. To a man, the clones and their creator took a step forwards, closing the circle about him ever tighter and leaving him with no way out. A few moments later, from the altitude of the competitor's area, twin sets of bandaged fists clenched in virtually impotent anguish, sorrow and rage. The tears in Lee's eyes were nothing to do with the flames of youth this time. Instead, even as the crutch that was now a part of him creaked in protest as his fist crushed it and blood started to seep from the inside of his hand, the taijutsu master, former taijutsu master, almost unwittingly the death knell sounded in his head once more, though he was sure he hadn't been meant to overhear that conversation. Guy-sensei had a loud voice. The doctors say the damage is too severe. I can never be a ninja again, but even so I won't give up. But this, he barely even noticed Tenten's hand in his own, her face buried in his shoulder as she could stomach the scene of destruction no longer. Even as his injured arm stroked comfortingly down the weapon mistress's back, the spandex-wearing ninja found he could not so much as blink as he saw the ninja he had tried since the first day of the academy to beat and surpass dispatched as effortlessly as Neji had used to do him. It was like watching a children's game of keep away, only with more explosions and one piggy in the middle who didn't change roles. Naruto and his clones had Neji hemmed in, and by dint of their explosive fists they were casually knocking the Hyuga prodigy around between them, unfazed by the explosions that were sending the branch member flying. No sooner had he landed that he was hit once more and the cycle continued, the circle getting smaller and Neji, from what little he could see of the battered ninja through the smoke, increasingly more devastated. This isn't a fight anymore. Lee had at first been confident in his teammate, as for all his dour demeanor Neji had the skills to back up his talk of fate, but ever since the first exchange it had been completely one way and it didn't look like Naruto was going to let up. This is just punishment. I know Naruto-kun was very serious when he made his vow, but would he actually go as far as to? Lee shut off that thought because, if he was honest with himself, he didn't want to think of the answer. Instead he trusted in his sensei to step in as he had a month ago should things escalate, and focused on the one grain of golden truth in this swamp of discord and bitterness. Naruto had been a dead last like himself, and if he could defeat a genius, surely it was only a matter of time and hard training until he could do the same. Even as that thought crossed his mind and he was forced to watch once more as the top rookie of his year was comprehensively destroyed in front of all of Konoha. And as he felt the breath hitch in Tenten's chest as the sounds of Neji's beating filtered up to them, for the first time in his life Lee felt a tiny seed of doubt gnawing at his will. If he could not defeat Neji even with all his training and the Hyuga was being made to look a fool so effortlessly by his opponent, was there ever any way he or indeed anyone else in his peer group could even hope to close the gap on Naruto as he was now? For his part, Guy wanted to step in. Truly he did care for his students, but unlike the previous time he knew that Naruto wasn't out for the kill as Gaara had been. The Jinchuriki wasn't aiming to murder or maim his opponent, he was looking for something else instead, something that Guy understood all too well and, in his heart of hearts, was forced to agree with. He who sows pain, reaps pain. The thought echoed in his mind as he closed his eyes regretfully at another explosion from the arena. Neji all but dead on his feet as he was shoved and punched around at will by the circling clones as Naruto, the real one, had taken a step back from the combat and appeared completely disinterested by the whole affair, whistling and occasionally checking his wrist as thought glancing at a watch. It was unseemly, it was extremely denigrating to his opponent both as a shinobi and a person, and it was exactly the kind of harsh medicine Neji may have needed in Guy, both as an optimist and a sensei trying to do the best he could with a boy who blotted virtually everything and everyone out and lived by an unchanging, unchallenged creed with almost fanatical devotion, couldn't provide. The Hyuga prodigy had attempted to shame and humiliate, not to mention kill, his cousin simply because of differences between their clan. Now Naruto was showing him exactly what that felt like and how belittlement and scorn could cut deeper than any knife or jutsu known. Guy was about to mentally count down from 30 ready to end the bout at that point if the proctor didn't step in. The Uzumaki was having his fun, but there was a limit he was willing to endure for the sake of childish revenge, when suddenly there was a shout from one of the clones in the circle. "Hey boss, I think he's about to crap out on us." Really? Already? There was no need for the real Naruto to shout back, but he did it anyway, further grinding glass into the open wounds he'd carved into Neji's pride. "I was hoping for better from a prodigy, but, I guess." The orange genin said nothing more. Instead, for the first time in the match other than when he'd used his Kage Bunshin jutsu, making hand seals and muttering, squinting, Guy's massive eyebrows rose as he noted the finishing seal. Tora. But that would mean, he got no further as a torrent of flame erupted from between Naruto's lips, a narrow jet of dragon fire that he directed right onto the palms of his hands. What this was in aid of Guy couldn't fathom, even though he'd seen the new combat gloves the Uzumaki was wearing and assumed they must be somehow immune to the heat. But for a long moment Naruto stood with his hands in the flame even as his clones continued pushing the now nearly unconscious Neji around, though thankfully with fewer explosions now. All eyes were on the Jinchuriki's apparently masochistic actions before. With a sudden spin and last exhalation, Naruto cut off his technique and roared. Now. The plan was in motion, and even before it had ended Guy saw the younger genin's clinical brutality in action. With a concerted heave his clones pitched the Hyuga out of their circle and, helpless, Neji stumbled right towards where Naruto stood waiting, his arms spread wide and with the metal of his gloves almost glowing cherry red with the heat. Neji's muffled scream was terrible as those burning hands suddenly moved forwards in a clapping motion, landing with perfect precision on his cheeks and searing the vulnerable skin as the Jinchuriki held on and refused to let go, branding the older boy's face with his grip and his gloves. This was a step too far. Guy had been stunned by this callous mutilation but was shocked into action by Neji's yell of agony, the first expression of distress he'd ever heard from his stoic student, and without a second thought he hurled himself into the arena, hitting the dusty floor just as Naruto finally let go of Neji's face and the stink of burning hair and flesh began to pervade the air around them. It seemed, however, that the Jinchuriki wasn't done. His hands, now cooler but still encased in metal, flashed forwards and hauled Neji in by the tatters of his shirt as, with a grunt of effort, Naruto crouched, pulled and then hefted the Hyuga off the floor, holding him across his shoulders. Guy saw the genin's lips move and was just quick enough to channel chakra to his ears, hearing Naruto's whispered words to his semi-conscious enemy. "Make a wish, you white-eyed bastard." There was a bang, much louder than those that had come before, and Neji was lifted, vertically lifted off the Jinchuriki's shoulders for a distance of at least 5 feet. Naruto merely stepped backwards, seemingly happy to let his opponent hit the dirt hard, but in this he was to be disappointed, Guy moving with his customary eye-blurring speed to catch his Hyuga student before he could do any more damage with the impact. Quickly looking over his genin's injuries and noting with a scowl the reason behind Naruto's new hand wear, the Junin whipped around with Neji in his arms and glared at the other boy only to find himself masking surprises. Rather than being cowed, Naruto merely bounced his frosty expression right back onto him as the proctor called the match. "When that prick wakes up, tell him that free bird or caged bird is a moot point to me. The Jinchuriki's voice was deceptively soft, but his eyes were hard and pitiless as sapphires, boring into Guy before flicking down to where Neji was now free from pain and unconscious in his arms. A slight snarl on his face as he finished. If he ever, and I mean ever, tries to put a finger on another Konoha ninja outside of an authorized spar, I'll rip his wings off and laugh myself sick watching him spend the rest of his miserable life trying to scrabble around in the dirt. Got that? Despite his personal misgivings on the subject and thoughts that Naruto had gone too far by potentially permanently disfiguring his enemy, Guy couldn't help but recognize and respect his point, as he hadn't, at the end, killed his opponent when such a course of action would have been easily within his capabilities, and therefore merely nodded. Naruto for his part did the same and then smirked as he looked back at his beaten opponent. Good. Now get him to the medics, the Jinchuriki advised, turning away without a second glance, the last comment tossed casually over his shoulder as he went. His body should heal, but right now it's life or death for his ego. Much as he would have loved to stay and berate the boy for his lack of tact in the aftermath of the contest, Guy realized he had more important things to worry about as his student squirmed in his arms, evidently coming around a little, and right now the jonin didn't want that to happen. With this in mind, he turned to where the medical staff present for the event were running towards him and hot-footed it over to them, though as he did so and made sure Neji was delivered into their care properly. He missed the spectacle of Naruto returning to the waiting area and being glomped by his sensei, the snake mistress, exulting that she hadn't seen and stomping that damned cool since she herself gained her chunin rank some years ago. The rest of the competition save one genin of Suna slowly edging away from the chattering duo as they realized that Uzumaki Naruto might not actually be the one he'd appeared to be in all the time they'd known him, and, more to the point, probably wasn't entirely sane if he was willing to let someone as crazy as the second exam proctor tutor him for a month. As the ninja of the council saw the seals in the palms of Uzumaki Naruto's hands flicker and then fade into smoke, the thoughts running through their mind were summed up by the short, sharp expletive muttered by the youngest woman on the council, Sum, raising her head at the smaller child as she licked suddenly dry lips. So, you can kill someone with that seal, just by touching them. Depends if you believe something in a seal that's destroyed is truly dead or not, Naruto pointed out, flexing his hand before smiling over at the alpha of the Inuzuka pack. Far as I'm concerned, though, none of those Oto or Suna bastards came back, and, as they were my first live test subjects, I'd say it works well enough to make no real difference. But, those seals you use, they are just as you say they are, Shikaku cut in, his tactician brain already alight with possibilities, the traditional storage and chakra storage seals, not any specialized varieties. Exactly as I said. Naruto nodded, opening his mouth to make a second point before someone else, unable to hold his desire for this new weapon that had apparently been hidden in plain sight all along, spoke. Then the teaching of these seals and the knowledge of how to apply them in battle as you do should become compulsory for all Konoha's ninja. The old warhawk Danzo spoke, for the first time in a long time, his usually emotionless voice clouded with want as his single eyes fixed Naruto with its unblinking stare. You have granted the leaf a weapon of incalculable power, Uzumaki-san, for that you are to be thanked. Strangely though, the Uzumaki snorted at the declaration. And for your lack of understanding of basic fuinjutsu you're to be pitied, he shot back scathingly, forcing even Sarutobi to raise his eyebrows as he was unused to Danzo being treated so harshly. You try to get a ninja to use my seals the way to said, and I can guarantee half our forces would vanish overnight. Yes, they might know how to draw a storage seal on paper, but does that mean they can instantly create it, and a mirror image copy of it at that, within a split second? No, I don't think they could. In fact, the only reason I can isn't because I'm a genius, or I've got some helping hand from my family genetics to steal the hard work of others. It's because I spent years, decades even, of my own time practicing how to copy and draw the mirrored matrices, every line, every stroke of the brush, and, After that and getting used to forming the kanji out of my own chakra, every nuance of how that chakra had to be applied to them just so to make them work. It was tedious, soul-grindingly boring work that drove me to tears at times, but I did it, perfected it, and the results now speak for themselves. I will teach those that wish to learn if you want me to, but they're going to learn the way I did. Through a long, hard slog and hour after hour calligraphy lessons, reading books on sealing and other techniques, and, more than that, the chakra control needed to make the techniques less than immediately lethal and to ensure they don't rupture their own chakra coils trying to drain their enemies. Anko-sensei, I'm sure, would love to get involved in that bit, he mentioned with a grin, one that was soon echoed by the snake summoner as visions of thrashing other ninja through their paces flickered behind her eyes. Oh, too right I would. I'd love to whip a few lazy chunin into shape like I have with this baka. And I'd like to whip another one in a different manner, though it'd be cruel to see a grown teacher cry. Before she could travel too deeply into her fantasy, however, she was shaken back to reality by the voice of the Hokage, Sarutobi, quieting the council before more demands could be made. Enough, all of you. I understand your excitement over such a novel use of basic techniques, but we must respect Naruto-kun's techniques and the work he put into them. The old man pointed out sagely before looking at his adopted grandson with a more calculating gleam in his eyes as words of wisdom from one of his own students filtered back into his mind. Fuinjutsu is the only ninja skill that's hard and easy at the same time. Most ninja can do it to some degree, but few can master it because they're afraid to go against the status quo, scared to try new things. To be a seal master, you have to rise above that, you have to take risks and be creative. The most powerful of all Fuinjutsu disciples aren't those who can draw elaborate seals to do 101 things all at the same time. It's the little guy who uses one seal in one time and place to do one thing and do it flawlessly. That's the man I'm scared of, and why I think my student is going to be the best damned leader this village has ever seen. And Jiraiya had been right in that, and much else, though the Toad Sage was mostly absent from Konoha now due to his network of spies and informants. His legacy had lived on through the fourth Hokage Namikaze Minato, and again, it seemed, through Minato's own son, who had followed in his father's footsteps and turned something that was simple in theory into a lethal attack. Before he could figure out exactly how to steer this now thorny problem through the council without resorting to killing intent and violence, however, there was one more thing he had to do, a rumor that he had to confirm from Naruto himself since, during the invasion, his attention had been otherwise engaged. Having heard of your work though, Naruto, the Jinchuriki quickly looked up as Sarutobi steepled his fingers under his chin and fixed him with a steady gaze, tone studiously neutral as he went on. One thing I'm almost certain of but need to be sure. You said you worked for decades on these seals. Does that mean you know the secret behind your other favorite technique? The width of the smile was answer enough. With a low laugh that was almost a cough, Naruto nodded, and with a gesture, two clones appeared flanking him, the council almost imperceptibly leaning backwards as they recognized exactly what technique Sarutobi had been referring to and, after putting two and two together, realizing with mounting dread a faint inkling into how dangerous Uzumaki Naruto now truly was. Yep. Managed that almost after the night I graduated, the Jinchuriki confirmed with a nod, glancing up at the corporeal clones with a nod and a smirk. I'd been battered all over the training grounds by Kakashi-sensei, so had a clone cook ramen while I took a shower. It must have dispelled when I was getting dry because I suddenly knew I was having prawn ramen, and how could I have known that from the bathroom? I did a bit more experimenting and worked out that, yes, my clones could work as long as they had chakra to do so, and yes, I would get the memories from them doing it. So that made the training so much easier. 5 months I've been a genin now, give or take, and in those 5 months I've never, at any one time, had less than 50 of me working on my seals in one form or another. My apartment block's deserted except for me, and every house and room is a workspace, given over to me to perfect these seals and how to use them. How else do you think I got skilled enough to make seals purely out of chakra instead of blood or ink or other media? Years and decades, as I've said, spent honing these techniques and, when the time came, Naruto's face was suddenly framed in blue, shining from the light of his own chakra as his clones simultaneously raised their hands and the seals once more flared into being, the council seeing this and paling further as they realized just how exponentially the Kage Bunshin Jutsu raised Naruto's threat level. They worked flawlessly, as Suna, Oto and Orochimaru all found out to their cost. Though he'd never admit it, the genjutsu did affect Naruto at first. His eyelids were drooping dangerously close to closed before a swift whack on the head made his yelp and look around glaring. What was that for? Look alive, brat, Anko demanded, already for nearby threats as her chakra burst snapped her student back to his senses. We're under attack. Wah! Naruto began dumbly before seeing the smoke in the Hokage's box and recognizing that something was now very, very wrong. How the? In fact, now though many people would have said, and often been proved right, that Naruto was by no means a genius, he did have some kind of intelligence and the sight of fights and brawls breaking out and throughout the arena were enough to motivate him into protecting his village, fingers already in a cross seal as he readied his chakra. Forget it. Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. For a second the competitor's box mirrored that of the leaders as it was shrouded in smoke. As it blew away on the breeze, however, around 3 dozen Narutos stood and heard their creator's intent. Spread out. Search and destroy. If it's not wearing a leaf, make it disappear. There was a rousing shout of, Asu. And the clones all shot off, the original watching them go for a split second before something on top of the arena caught his eye. Before he could do much to think about it though his official sensei appeared, the one-eyed smut reader glancing at his student as Sakura hurried over to join them. Good thinking, Naruto, your clones can help as distractions for the other ninja. The genin scowled at merely being thought of as a distraction but held his tongue as Kakashi flashed through some seals and in a puff of smoke a little brown dog with a forlorn expression appeared, looking up quizzically at his summoner. However, I need you, Sakura-chan, Shikamaru and Shino to follow Sasuke. He took off after the Suna genin. Use Pakun to track them down and give backup as required, understood. Sensei, Sakura was smart enough to know a good plan when she heard one but, this time, she couldn't help but point out a flaw in the copy nin's reasoning, Shikamaru's kind of. A sudden muffled thud, followed by a wheezing grunt of pain, made her choke off those words with a wince. Naruto had taken matters into his own hands and casually stomped on the snoring shadow user, stooping down and scragging Shikamaru by his collar as the Nara fought for breath. If I ever catch you slacking again, Shika, the next thing that drops through your clan's letterbox will be a list of all your favorite cloud-gazing sites addressed to your mother, the Jinchuriki told him casually before looking down to the pug. Got a scent? Yeah, kid. Follow me. The dog nodded, Naruto mimicking the gesture after another quartet of shadow clones puffed into being around him, shooting off in a quartet as the Jinchuriki glanced back down at the summoned creature, a smirk on his lips as they both shot off through the hole Maida guy had kindly punched in the wall for them. As they landed on the rubble and heard the sounds of battle around them, Sakura decided she had to be the one to put her head in the kitsune's mouth and asked tentatively. Naruto, what were those clones for? At the smile he sent over his shoulder towards her, the cherry blossom felt her skin grow cold and pucker into goosebumps even before she heard the answer. Just answering a challenge. Too right, the Jinchuriki thought to himself as he headed towards Konoha's outskirts, following the small brown shape that ran ahead of them as he recalled the purple obelisk he'd seen atop the Hokage's box of the arena. Glowing a dull, evil purple like a challenge. There's only one guy who uses seals in this town and his name is Uzumaki Naruto. The Anbu unit of Konoha were made up of specialist ninja and were all highly trained, highly competent professionals who could kill a man as easily as that man could crush a bug beneath his sandal. They were the best the Leaf had to offer, and therefore the sight of a barrier their strongest techniques couldn't breach, regardless of the words of their Hokage to leave it in one piece, was a sore test of their pride. What happened to that pride at the sight of said insurmountable barrier being systematically dismantled by a child, and the Jinchuriki child of the nine-tailed fox no less, can only be imagined. They had known none of the foursome were the original as soon as they'd seen them land on the roof and made no effort to stop the clones approaching the barrier. If nothing else, they might understand how the Fuinjutsu construct worked if the clones were destroyed by it. However, following surrounding the barrier at a corner each, the clone had as one punched a fist forwards onto the dull purple wall, and immediately their chakra had started to skyrocket, the Anbu almost falling back a step as the shadow clone, somehow, seemed able to rip the energy of the barrier right into themselves. Interrupting only to summon reinforcements in the form of fresh orange bodies, the four clones were quickly joined by others of their kind, each one standing shoulder to shoulder with its brothers and apparently weakening the cage that was holding the two most powerful ninja in this conflict in isolation. Suddenly the barrier dimmed, flickered once or twice, and was, in an eye blink, completely gone. Before anyone could react, there were suddenly four unconscious Oto nins sprawled out around the corners of where the barrier had stood and, more importantly, with a single bone-chilling battle cry, the new and apparently improved clone army charged as one, trampling their former adversaries in the stampede towards their new opponent, the snake Sanin Orochimaru. Though it was hard to see specifics in the press of Orange, all the Anbu present suddenly snapped to attention as the armed and armored form of their leader landed before them, breathing slightly heavily but otherwise unharmed as he glanced over his shoulder at where his traitorous student now had his hands full trying to dispatch the orange swarm that had gotten in a few blows on him and given Sarutobi the chance of a breather. Taicho, the name Anbu snapped to attention. How and why did you bring that barrier down, and what is Uzumaki Naruto doing here? Hokage-sama, all the Uzumaki present here are clones and they brought the barrier down on their own. That made a gray eyebrow raise in suspicion before a sudden warcry made the old warrior look back at the ongoing battle in time to hear a loud explosion and several puffs of smoke. Indeed, in that case, get to the village and reinforce the perimeter, drive the invaders from Konoha. I will deal with Orochimaru when Naruto-kun is through with him, assuming there's anything left at all. The Anbu did as they were bid without further protest and left Sarutobi to his thoughts, though he never relaxed his guard, and even Enma, still in his staff form, formed an eye out of the side of the staff to see the battle as it unfolded. Naruto's clone army would lose, of that Sarutobi was sure, but even so it wasn't going all Orochimaru's way. Even from where he was standing, the Sandaime could feel his former student's killing intent rising, proof that the boy had gotten under even Orochimaru's skin with his persistent nature and his pugilism. Sarutobi, is that the boy who claims he will have your hat one day? It is indeed Enma Dono, the Hokage answered, tilting his head as he watched one of the clones get a boost off another and leap up towards where Orochimaru had been blasted up into the air, presumably by the technique Naruto had used earlier against the Hyuga boy. Wait, was that? But where would he have learned the lotus techniques? And if he carries on the way he's going, he may very well get there sooner than even I anticipated. A point as valid now as it was then, Sarutobi found himself thinking as he recalled the rest of the battle from his point of view. Orochimaru was able to best the clones in the end, but in doing so he was weakened and wounded and in no state to challenge me. He got away. That the snake had slithered through his fingers once more was a bitter blow to Sarutobi's pride, but he tempered the feeling with the knowledge that his village now had 4 of the snake's inner circle in their possession, as well as proof that Orochimaru had assassinated a Kage and implemented a war. Grounds for war between Oto and a Konoha-Suna alliance. Sound will be crushed before it can even begin to rise in power. Aside from that, however, Naruto's techniques and the method by which he was able to defeat not only a curse seal-powered barrier but also another Jinchuriki forced my hand in calling this council. That much was certainly true. Not only had he been given 3 separate reports from Aburame Shino, Haruno Sakura and Nara Shikamaru that Naruto had displayed hitherto unheard of powers to, amongst other things, dispose of 7 members of a sound ambush squad to save the Nara Saiyan's life, destroy a puppet with a single punch before knocking out the puppeteer cleanly and then force the manifested form of the Shukaku to disperse back into sand by using his explosion techniques. The latter of these actions had been seen from Konoha itself, the monstrous tanuki screaming as a swarm of orange engulfed it for a moment before several eruptions of sand from all across its lumpen body showed where the clones had made their mark. This combined with several other after-action reports indicating that Naruto's clones had had a substantial impact on the battle for Konoha by defeating several enemy ninja with what appeared to be nothing but simple taijutsu moves that left behind nothing but smoke, to say nothing of the fuss Hayashi had been kicking up in demanding answer for his nephew's maiming had resulted in today. This council a prelude with meeting the Suna elders tomorrow to thrash out a new peace treaty as the desert village realized it had been wrongly led into the conflict. Though this meeting, like the one to happen tomorrow, has ended very well indeed for us all, least of all Naruto. I believe we have heard enough here. The Sandame spoke aloud to the council, stilling all discontent with frosty glances and pointed looks. We asked Naruto-kun to explain what techniques he used to aid Konoha during the invasion and he has done so, very well indeed I might add. In fact, though the exam was suspended at the halfway point, for services rendered to the village as acting Hokage of the village hidden in the leaves, hereby promote Uzumaki Naruto to the rank of Chunin, effective immediately. In light of what we have just heard I trust there will be no opposition to this. That was a loaded question if ever there was one, though Naruto had his detractors, least of all Danzo and now Hiyashi, after he had quite deliberately dragged the Hyuga clans, name and declarations of strength through the mud, none were foolish enough to speak out when the boy was the hero of the hour. Unusually it appeared that Naruto was too shocked for words, mouth open and eyes bulging until, at last, a slap across the shoulders from Anko made him choke. All right, my student. Our student Anko-chan, Kakashi chimed in with an eye smile. I'd like to think I had at least a passing influence on his education. Fine then, our student, the kunoichi relented before looking happy once more, squashing the back of Naruto's head between her as she hugged him over the chair. Just got his first promotion, you know what this means. I cleaned up the bet between the Junin senseis. No, well, yes, but apart from that, it's party time. Just make sure he's fit to be on duty for tomorrow Anko. Sarutobi had an idea that his words may have fallen on deaf ears as Naruto, still not fully snapped out of his shock, was semi-lifted out of his seat by the exuberant special Junin. He has to inform his team and be fitted for his best. I doubt she heard one word I just said. The old Cage sighed as he watched his surrogate grandson get half-dragged out the council room, face still slack but life returning, as his teachers made their way to wherever it was his ninja went to celebrate or get smashed as was their wont in Ibiki. Realizing he was now surplus to requirement, bowed and also exited. Sarutobi watched them go with a slight smile and, belatedly feeling the attention of the other council members on him again, blithely dismissed them all and spoke over his shoulder. Not quite what I expected by a long chalk, but a pleasant surprise nonetheless. Enough to get you back into teaching ways perhaps. Several of the ninja present swapped glances and might have just started to wonder if senility hadn't gripped their leader perhaps a little too early before they mostly started at the base, booming chuckle that came from one of the walls. Ha! I could never pull a fast one over you sensei, said an amused Jiraiya as he disengaged his cloaking jutsu and put a hand on his chin, thinking over what he'd seen just now and liking it a lot. Naruto's got, if not his father's brains, then certainly his creative streak. Just flip a basic seal around and let it work like it should. Textbook example of thinking outside the box. As for me, Not sure yet. Tell you what though. Let me take a certain new chunin of yours on that mission you sent me and, when it's over, we'll talk. Omake won the morning after. So then sensei, do I dare ask how it went? The only thing that stopped Yumino Iruka from bellowing like a rogue elephant and reenacting one of the infamous chases from his most troublesome former students' school days was the appalling ache from his nether regions at the thought of moving faster than his current hobble. Instead he gritted his teeth firmly and shot the new Chunin a look of abrupt disgust. I have nothing to say to you, Naruto. Ah, don't be like that, Iruka-sensei. The orange-wearing figure tried to smile, but the expression shriveled up on his face at the glare Iruka sent his way and, sighing, he had to come clean. Look, sorry it had to be you, but if I hadn't made that deal, I wouldn't be wearing this vest right now. And I wouldn't have a tray of ice cubes down my shorts. The academy instructor snapped back, not quite willing to forgive the newest of Konoha's Chunin his deception just yet. I really can't believe you sometimes, Naruto. You invited me out to your promotion ceremony and celebration, which I was grateful to be part of, by the way, only for me to end up bushwhacked by the most renowned psychopath in the Konoha Ninja Corps and later find out you set it up that way. Well, what else was I supposed to do? Naruto asked pleadingly. You know what would have happened to me if I hadn't introduced you. I let you read the note. I also know, very intimately I know, what happened to me because you introduced us. Iruka tried to rear back to his full height but, crippled by an ache from an area of a man's body that should never be in pain, he wasn't quite able to manage it and snapped back into his half-crouched posture. Enko cornered me. I'm almost certain she drugged me with something slipped into my drink and the next thing I know she's using me as her sexual punching bag. Do you know how many men would have died to be where you were right then? Do you know how many men would have died if they'd been where I was? The teacher riposted, checking his watch and realizing he was running late. Well, hobbling late as the case may be. Oh well, at least it's over, for now. Naruto winced. Oh, second date. Second date. Iruka confirmed with a nod, even if a small, or not so small, if her screaming was anything to go by. Part of him wailed and shrank back in protest of going through that sort of abuse again, and this time it will be a date instead of a drink, some chat and a quick shunshin to her room. Glad to hear it. Hopefully by the time I get back from my new mission you and Enko-sensei will have had plenty of practice making a, actually what is the word for a baby dolphin? Wow. Touchy, darting back from the slap sent his way by the irked man, he gave his traditional grin even as Iruka huffed and made to shuffle off on his way. Anyway, see you later, sensei. Got a few errands to run before I have to meet this Jiraiya guy. Make sure you and Enko-sensei don't do anything I wouldn't do. With that he turned on his heels and sprinted off, just fast enough to dodge a second slap and miss Iruka's muttered comments about there being very little the Jinchuriki could do that Mitarashi Anko couldn't when she was in the right mood. The sound of the door swinging open was enough to make Tenten look up and, after that, the flash of orange in her vision was enough to have her in a stance as she looked between her bed-ridden teammate and the one who had put him there, both her other teammate and her sensei watching on as the weapon mistress spoke. Uzumaki. Chunin Uzumaki. She corrected herself after seeing the new vest now on the outside of his usual uniform. Why are you here? Why? That should be obvious. I'm here to apologize. That made both the two walking and one walking wounded of Team 9 glance at each other sharply. There was a moment of silent communication between the three of them before, seemingly elected as the one most likely to keep her head in the face of this new and startling development, the weapon mistress spoke once more. It might be a little late for apologies, Tenten pointed out, keeping an iron grip on her temper as she pointed to the bed-ridden former rookie of her year. The mednins say there's almost no chance of the scars healing. Naruto quirked an eyebrow before flicking his eyes towards the genin she was indicating and, almost out of habit, his lip curled dismissively. What? Him? He's still breathing, that's apology enough. he said before narrowing his vision and injecting some steel into his voice. Though unless he points those all-seeing eyes of his somewhere else I might rectify that oversight on my part. Don't make me slap the fate out of you again, bitch. Neji twitched at the reminder, the pads of bandages on his cheeks hiding his flush of humiliation as well as the permanent reminder of his belief that Naruto had branded onto his face, the kanji for, Unmei no Onana, transferred from the Jinchuriki's hot gloves onto Neji's cheeks by his final strikes and left there forever. Seeing his student put on the spot once more and not liking the reminder, Guy decided it was time to interject at this point. That is enough, Naruto. If you have merely come here to rub salt in my student's wounds, then either leave now or I will raise this unseemly conduct with the Hokage. No need for that, Guy-sensei. Like I said, I was here to apologize both to you and to Lee-san, the Jinchuriki assured him, sinking into a deep bow as both the beautiful beasts exchanged glances. Enko-sensei said she learned from you how to open her hachiman and, while she does have your permission to teach those she deems worthy, that you are the ultimate authority on those kinjutsu. In addition, I know of Lee-san's desire to prove he is a great ninja without chakra and merely wanted him to be aware that my use of his techniques wasn't to try to dissuade him from that noble goal but simply an act of necessity, taught by my sensei to ensure that I could use my own techniques to their full capacity. Naruto said nothing more but remained his bow until, at length, he heard Lee speak. The green-clad ninja much more subdued than usual as he used his crutch to push himself to his feet. Yosh Naruto-kun, your flames of youth are burning brightly to learn to open the celestial gates in such a short time. Ah, yours leave mine in the shade, Lee-san. Naruto pointed out, standing back up as he went on. I can merely crack open the first two while you can split under 5, a true genius of hard work. Anyway, I've got to go. I have a mission to try and find someone who might, amongst other things, be able to patch you back up, Lee. If she does, I want to be first in line for a spar when you're back to your best. Okay, fuzzy brows. Luckily, as far as Naruto was concerned, Lee's injuries slowed him down enough so that the Jinchuriki could slip away from the attempted glomp as the genin was overwhelmed by gratitude and potential hope for recovery from his crushing injuries at Gaara's hands before messy bisection by man-hug of doom could occur. Instead, the new Chunin quickly vacated the room citing a prior engagement and left the other two members of Team 9 to deal with the forthcoming genjutsu of Sunset and Surf. To be them, but hell, they're probably used to it and I've got enough bad memories in my head without going there right now. Luckily, Naruto caught sight of the man who'd requested him for his latest mission before the taller man saw him and was therefore able to get the first word in. Jiraiya-sama. As the man looked over his shoulder at his name, Naruto bowed in greeting. Much as he disliked social norms at the best of times, he knew enough to show respect to a man who could probably decimate him without so much as breaking a sweat even if he went all out with his sealing techniques. Chunin Uzumaki Naruto reporting for duty. Ah, good, not before time, the Sannin pointed out, having had one eye on the time as he appraised the boy in front of him and recalled what he'd heard from both the council meeting he'd invisibly sat in on and his own perusals of his sensei's notes of the boy. So then, you're the kid who single-handedly turned the tide of an invasion and gave old Orotem a bloody nose into the bargain. Smiling awkwardly, the Jinchuriki scratched the back of his head. Well, it wasn't that great. You give yourself too little credit, Naruto-kun. The voice made the aforementioned boy whip around to see the rest of his team approaching, Kakashi giving an eye smile over the top of his book. I managed to see several instances where your clones made decisive contributions to the battle. Not that I realized it at the time. At first I thought the smoke was due to his clones dispersing. It wasn't until I saw that one clone take out those two Odo creeps heading for the academy that I started figuring it out. Admittedly, Suna's upset that there's nothing left to bury for some of their ninja, but, hey, they knew the risks, they pay the price. Fortunately for the copy nin, one of his students picked up the baton and her voice drowned out his thinking as Sakura went on. Yeah Naruto, if it hadn't been for you that Gaara-tem would have crushed me and Sasuke-kun, said Uchiha made a face similar to a man biting at that point, but even he couldn't deny it was true. He had been at the limit and preparing himself to greet his ancestors when the backup had arrived and Gaara had been persuaded to go after another target. Sakura had almost died in pushing him out the way of a claw of sand that had started to crush her slowly. Gaara trying to goad his new prey into fighting all out by threatening his friends, only for Naruto to respond by landing next to where Sakura was pinned against a tree and putting his hand on the constricting sand. Sasuke had caught a glimpse of Naruto's expression as the sand had suddenly lost coherency at his touch and fallen to the ground, and was suddenly very grateful he wasn't the target of the dove's ire as the former dead last sprang into the attack and, as Gaara was still comatose with a severe case of chakra exhaustion and swathed in bandages due to the explosive damage he'd sustained at Naruto's hands, he was still grateful now that Naruto had never gone all out against either him or Sakura. Ah, it wasn't much Sakura-chan. I wasn't going to let him hurt anyone just because he's got a few screws loose in his head, the Jinchuriki pointed out before Jiraiya cleared his throat. Be that as it may, I'm afraid we must get going, the Toad Sage pointed out before noticing Sakura's face fall slightly. But don't worry, this mission shouldn't take long, so you can have your shining white knight back soon. I'm sure he'd love a hand stripping off his hot, sweaty armor when we get back. Sakura's face promptly turned as pink as her hair before that shade started bleaching towards a pale green at the implications, Naruto likewise shuddering even as he glared over his shoulder at the smirking Sennin. Ew, why would you say something like that? Are you some kind of pervert or something? Of course not. I'm a super pervert, Jiraiya proclaimed proudly, and Naruto felt something inside him start crying that it simply wasn't fair. Why did all his sensei, except maybe Iruka sensei, but as that man was willingly going on a second date with Mitarashi Anko, he was starting to have doubts, have such serious personality defects. Two perverts and a psychopath. Sounds like a bad comedy, but, actually, it's a welcome to my life. Still complaining never got anything done, so before Jiraiya could do anything else to grind the first few fledgling green shoots of his good reputation back into the mud, Naruto kicked the man in the shin and, as he let out a yelp and started hopping, set off out of the gates. Come on Arrow Sennin. The sooner we're gone the sooner we get back. See you later guys, keep the ramen hot for me. With those words, his teammates watching him go and his new sensei hobbling along in his wake muttering about ignorant gakis not understanding greatness when they saw it, Uzumaki Naruto, Chunin of Konoha, budding Fuinjutsu artist and a ninja capable of killing with a single touch, stepped through the gates of his village and towards his next great adventure. So friends, this was episode 2 of this thrilling Hiraishin adventure. If you enjoyed it and want episode 3 soon, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also comment down your thoughts. Do you think Naruto will perfect Hiraishin and surpass the Fourth Hokage's legendary speed? I'll see you in the next episode.